Uh, so a little bit about Wendy. She is the queen of cold calling and is an author, speaker, and sales trainer. She is recognized as one of the leading authorities on lead generation, cold calling, and new business development. And some of her clients include Avon Products, ADP, Sprint, and thousands of entrepreneurs throughout the country. She's been featured in the New York Times, Business Week, Entrepreneur Magazine, Selling Power, Sales and Marketing Management, and various other publications. And she's also a former ballet dancer who believes that everything in life she learned in ballet class. So Wendy, welcome. Thank you again. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And hello, everyone. I am so delighted to be here with you today and to talk about cold calling and new business development. And I particularly want to thank Shannon Duffy and Ben Stein and everyone at Jigsaw for inviting me to be here and then organizing this event. So our topic for today, and we'll go on to the first slide, is cold calling in the 21st century, the new rules. And, you know, I have been in business close to 20 years now, and cold calling has really changed in that time. It's much harder to get prospects on the telephone. You could call for hours sometimes and not actually speak with a live human being. When you do reach someone, people are busier than ever. People are certainly more stressed out than ever. And those are real changes, and those are real changes that you need to deal with every day. And that said, cold calling really is the perfect tool for today's difficult economy. It's proactive, it's direct, it's inexpensive, and when it's done well, it is extremely effective. The problem is that most people cold call rather poorly, and that's why it doesn't work for them. So my goal today is to give you some tools and give you some tips that are going to help you immediately increase your prospecting results, because I sincerely want each and every one of you to leave this webinar today with at least one new tool or one new idea that you can try out right away. And if you are brand new to sales, then probably everything I'm going to say today is going to be totally brand new to you. If you've been in sales for a while, you might have come across some of these ideas before. And if that does happen, if you find that you do recognize some of these ideas, I'm going to ask you to keep a beginner's mind, because being successful in cold calling or in sales in general, it's not about what you know. It's about what you do. And sometimes it's the very simple little things that are going to make the most difference for you. And the best example of this is probably in sports, where if there is a team that is constantly losing, the owners will fire the coach, they'll bring in a new coach, and what's the first thing that the new coach says? The new coach says, back to basics. So if you get one tip from this webinar that results in one sale that you wouldn't have had otherwise, then our time together will have been well spent. So who is this queen of cold calling anyway? Let me tell you just a little bit about my background. First of all, I was never supposed to be doing this. I was supposed to be a ballerina. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and I moved to New York City, where I still live and work. I moved to New York City as a teenager to dance. And then, eventually, like every artist in New York City, I needed a day job. So I got a job with a telemarketing company, and it turned out that I was really good at it. Who knew? Because ballet dancers don't talk. We dance, but we don't talk. And so I did that for a while, and eventually I started my own business where I had clients that I would represent, and I was on the phone cold calling and setting appointments for them. And from there, I segued into my current business, which is training and coaching. My business today is working with entrepreneurs and business owners and sales professionals that are looking to develop new business and build sales revenue. And I feel like I'm doing something that's really important, because let's face it, without prospecting, you're not going to have customers and you're not going to have sales revenue. So the bottom line is, I've built my entire business by talking to people on the phone. And if you go to my website, which is queenofcoldcalling.com, and you look at my client list, you'll see that I have a fairly impressive roster of corporate clients. And I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm really not. This is for the people that are either just starting out or the ones who are struggling. I was a ballet dancer. I didn't know anything about business, but I was able to get on the phone and build a business. So if I could do it, then everyone that's listening in today can do it. And if you are struggling with prospecting, well, that's very common. A lot of people do. It can be tough at times, but it doesn't have to be. And the really good news is that there are things that you can learn. This is a communication skill, and like any communication skill, it can be learned and it can be improved on. And in working with my clients, I've seen many of them practice new skills, and then they're thrilled to see their results change. So today, and we'll go on to the next slide, we're going to be talking about, first of all, some of the myths and misconceptions about cold calling and what has changed and what works today. We're going to be talking about finding the best prospects, the ones who are most likely to buy. We'll talk about how to separate yourself from the pack and stand out and make sure that your prospects are going to be receptive to what you have to say. We'll talk about building rapport and finding your prospects' hot buttons so that your message is going to resonate with your prospects. And this, of course, is all in service of winning your prospects' business. And then at the end of the webinar, I'll also be sharing with you some additional resources that are available to you. So I also know that you're going to have a lot of questions. And we will be taking questions at the end, and this is always my favorite part. So as we're going along, if you think of a question, make sure to jot it down so that you can remember it and you can ask it later. And if you don't have paper and pen handy, or your laptop, whatever, get that all set, because I know that you're going to want to take some notes as well. So let's talk about cold calling. Cold calling has really changed, and we'll go on to the next slide. As I said before, I've been in business for close to 20 years, and 20 years ago, you could get people on the phone. It was easy to get people on the telephone, and you could have a conversation. Today, you could call all day long and never reach anybody. So that is one very huge change. There are also some myths and misconceptions about cold calling, and I want to talk about these. One very huge misconception is that cold calling is a numbers game, that you open up the phone book and you start calling, or that you make 100 dials a day and somebody's going to say yes to you. Another one is that every call is different, and I want to have a conversation with my client, with my prospects, so I can't use the script. And then there's my personal favorite, which is go through the nose and hang-ups until you finally get somebody to say yes to you. That sounds pretty horrifying. Wear your prospect down. Practice rebuttals so that you can corner them. Cold calling is manipulation. These are all myths. This is not what cold calling is about. However, we do have a new reality these days, and the new reality in the 21st century is that it's more difficult to get people on the telephone. It is far more difficult to get their attention, whether it's a phone call, an email, or a voicemail. So in all of these situations, whether it's a phone call, an email, or a voicemail, you better have something compelling to say. So your preparation really does count. It counts big time. The good news, however, is that there are now more ways to reach your prospects. 20 years ago, there was really only the landline, the office line, that you could call the prospect and reach the prospect on their office line. Well, today, in addition to the office line, you might be able to call your prospect on their cell phone. They might have a home office, and the main office gives out that contact number. You can also email your prospects. So while it might be more difficult, we now have more ways to reach prospects. Now what I'd like to do is ask you all a question. I'd like to hear from you and understand a little bit about where you are. So our first polling question today is, what is your goal? When you are making your calls, on your very first call, what is your goal? Is your goal to schedule a face-to-face appointment? Is your goal to schedule a web-based demo or a webinar appointment? Or is your entire sale handled over the phone? So you're closing on the phone. What is your goal? Because the goal, whatever your goal is, whether it's scheduling an appointment or you're doing the whole sale over the telephone, that goal is going to impact the structure of your call. And I'm going to be talking more about your goals in just a moment. So it looks like we have the results here. Okay, 71% of you are making calls to schedule an appointment, and that is not surprising because most salespeople start their sales cycle with a face-to-face appointment. 17% of you are scheduling a web-based demo or a webinar, and 13% of you do your entire sale over the telephone. Okay, good. So let's go on to the next slide. Because the first new rule is that you need to really understand your sales cycle and your goal. And you'll see on this slide I've given you a diagram where it says cold call, and then there's an arrow, and then there's an appointment. It says appointment, and an arrow. It says proposal. There's another arrow, and it says sale. And the reason I put this here is that your cold call is your introduction. There are many, many ways that one might be introduced or introduce oneself to a prospect. You can do direct mail. There's internet marketing. You might have a referral, or you go to a networking meeting. Cold calling is one way to introduce yourself to a prospect. The next step in anyone's sales cycle, once there has been an introduction, is to have a comprehensive conversation. For most of you, that conversation is going to happen at the face-to-face appointment. For some of you, those of you that are closing over the telephone, that conversation will take place on the telephone. However, you need to have that comprehensive conversation. The next step in this cycle, I call that the proposal stage, but that's essentially the conversation about deliverables and financial arrangements. Your proposal might be a very complex written document, or it might simply be a conversation that you have about deliverables and the financial arrangements. When everything works, then you close the sale. Everyone, no matter what you are selling, you are going to go through these 4 steps where there's some kind of introduction, there's a comprehensive conversation, you have a conversation then about deliverables and the financial arrangements, and then you either close or you don't close. Now, many people confuse the idea of cold calling with the idea of closing a sale. Cold calling is not closing the sale. Cold calling is the introduction. And this concept really frames your entire approach, because on most cold calls, you're not asking that prospect to buy from you over the telephone or to agree to let you replace their current vendor or current resource. You're only asking them to have a productive conversation. And this approach has 2 advantages. First of all, your prospect feels far less pressure. They don't feel like they're being asked to buy. And you never want a prospect to feel pressure because they'll run in the other direction. And the second advantage to this approach is that you're going to feel less pressure because you don't have to close on the telephone in the first phone call. So the question you want to ask yourself is, what is your goal for each step of your process? For your very first call, what is the action that you want your prospect to take? Because that is your goal, the action that you want that prospect to take. Now, I'm going to give you an example here. I got a call the other day from a potential coaching client, and he was a financial advisor, and his entire process was done over the phone. And so I asked him what was his goal for the very first phone call that he would make, and he said that his goal was to go over the prospect's 401k plan, which meant that the prospect was going to have to give him, was going to have to provide him all this financial information on the very first phone call. That's not a realistic goal. That prospect would have to agree to give a total stranger information about their finances. That is probably not going to happen. Maybe it's going to happen once in a while, but that is not the most likely scenario. So what this financial advisor has to do is he has to chunk it down. His first goal should be simply to get that prospect to agree to have the conversation. Once he has that agreement, the next goal might be to get answers to specific questions. And if you're doing appointment setting, it works exactly the same way, that your first goal is simply to get your prospect to agree to have the conversation. And that is going to be at the appointment, so that you're not asking that prospect to buy from you over the telephone. So to be really effective in cold calling, you always need to know exactly where you are in your cycle and what is your goal for that particular step. So write this down. The first question is, where are you in your sales cycle? And the second question to write down is, what is your goal? Okay, so now we're going on to the second rule of the new rules of cold calling, and that is targeting. The days of opening the phone book and start making calls and just cold calling is a numbers game, those days are over. Though truthfully, I don't think that approach ever worked really well. At least, even 5 years ago, you could make a whole lot of phone calls, talk to people, and maybe eventually reach somebody that would buy from you. It will not work today. So before you ever get on the telephone, you have to ask yourself the question, who are your best prospects? And by best, I mean who is most likely to buy a lot, and then come back and buy more. So you want to create your qualifying parameters. What makes a qualified prospect for you? And make these parameters concrete. It might be that you work in a particular vertical, or you work with companies that have a certain number of employees, or sales above a certain dollar amount. Or if you're working in the consumer market, maybe it's the age of your prospects, or where they live, or their level of education. What are the parameters? And do this homework first. If you're not sure, profile your best customers. And again, by best, I mean the customers that buy the most, keep buying and come back to buy more. And essentially what you're doing is you are looking for prospects that match the profile of your best customers, the ones that buy a lot. And it is much easier, not to mention more effective, to only call prospects that are targeted, that you believe from the information you've been able to gather have need of your products or services. And if you put together that targeted list, that is going to be far more effective for you. It's going to be easier for you, and the prospects will be far more receptive because you'll be calling them about something that they would be interested in. So write this down. Cold calling is not a numbers game. Your calling list must be highly targeted. In addition, if you're calling in business to business, you have to call the highest level person that you believe is the decision maker. Because if that person is not the decision maker, they'll know who is, and they can refer you to that person. One of the biggest mistakes that I see salespeople making constantly is calling coordinators rather than directors, or managers rather than vice presidents. And usually the thinking is that this type of prospect is easier. The opposite is actually true. If you are not speaking with a decision maker, you lose control of the process, you lengthen your sales cycle, and you risk losing the account altogether. This happened a couple of years ago. One of my coaching clients, he was in IT, which, by the way, has a very long sales cycle. And he had a prospect where he was only dealing with the second in command. And this prospect actually blocked him from being able to speak with the decision maker. However, this particular prospect, the second in command, kept assuring my client that he was going to get the order. Well, guess what? After close to a year of courting this particular prospect, the second in command came back and said the boss went with somebody else. Now, I'm sure that many of you that are listening in today have experienced that scenario. And one of the ways to avoid this is to simply start your prospecting at the top. And it's actually much easier to work from the top down than it is to start lower and try and work your way up. So write this down. If you are calling in business to business, call the highest level person that you believe is the decision maker. And write this down. Bottom line, if you are not talking to a qualified prospect, they will not buy from you, period. So let's do another polling question here. This is polling question number 2. I'll get another sense of who you are on the call today. And this polling question is, do you work with a script? And here are your choices. You always work with a script, you never work with a script, you sometimes work with a script, or you frequently work with a script. And scripting is always an issue whenever I'm doing a workshop or a talk. Sometimes I will get a lot of pushback on the idea of scripting. Many people say, oh, I can't work with a script, I don't feel comfortable, I feel phony, I can't be myself. There are a lot of reasons that people tell me they don't want to work with a script. So what do we have here? We have 14% of you always work with a script, 18% of you never work with a script, 45% of you sometimes work with a script, and 22% of you frequently work with a script. Well, let me share with you my definition of the word script. And my definition of the word script is, if you think before you speak. Now, all of you, even those of you that answered never, I never work with a script, all of you are working with scripts. You probably have a pretty standard way that you introduce yourself. I'm willing to bet that you have certain objections or certain questions that you hear time after time after time, and you probably have a fairly standard way that you answer those questions or that you respond to those objections. These are scripts. They may not be written down, they may be in your head, but they are scripts. So the question is not really, should you work with a script? The question is, does your script work? And one of the questions that I get asked all the time, people email me through my website, queenofcoldcalling.com, and the question I get asked all the time is, Wendy, what should I say? How should I respond to the objection, I'm not interested? And my response is always the same. I'm not interested is not an objection. I'm not interested means that you're not saying anything interesting. So what will interest your prospects? Let's do the next slide. The question that you really need to be able to answer is, why should your prospects buy from you? Because that's the question that they have. And in order to answer that, your approach has to be targeted to the market that you're calling. It has to be relevant. There is no generic script that is going to work. That's another question I get asked a lot is, Wendy, is there a good generic script that I can use to reach the hearts and minds and wallets of my prospects? No. Preparation counts. And you have to do this before you get on the telephone. So the answer to why should they buy from you is about the value that you provide to your customers. How do you help them? And let me share with you an email that I got through my website with this question. I'm going to read it right now. Wendy, I was wondering if you could give me advice on how to properly word my script. I start by introducing myself. Then I say their company name, helps associations with their marketing and communications to their members, including new member kits, billing systems, and direct mail. I'm calling to see if we could stop by for a quick 15-minute meeting to introduce ourselves and see if we can help you out in any way. I always get cut off right there without having the chance to offer a time. The issue here is that this caller is simply listing all the things that her company does. They do direct mail, they do billing systems, and what this does is it makes her and it makes the company that she represents into a commodity that is indistinguishable from any other similar commodity. And so the question that she needs to ask herself, and the question that you need to ask yourself, is why do customers buy these types of services, or why do customers buy these type of products? So in this example, since they help associations with their marketing communications to members, the value of this might be membership growth and membership retention, and that direct mail, billing systems, new member kits, et cetera, are the ways that this particular company implements the value of helping associations grow and retain their members. So this prospector would be a whole lot better off introducing herself and then saying something like, we have a track record of helping associations grow and retain their members. And that would be a far more compelling introduction. So write this down. The rule is on your introduction that you always lead with the value. And by the way, this is true in a phone call, it's true in a voicemail, and it's true in an email. Now, once this caller had introduced herself and given her value statement that they have a track record of helping associations grow and retain members, then she could go on to give an example. And I call these success stories because they're really edited down case studies. She could talk briefly about an association that she or someone at the company had worked with and what the problem was, whether it was growth or retention or both, and how they helped that customer and what was the result. For example, she might introduce herself and then say, we have a track record of helping associations grow and retain their members. For example, we've been working with XYZ Association, and they were losing their members as fast as they were gaining them. So we were able to come in and we did A, B, and C, and now the retention rate has gone up by X%. And that would be a success story that illustrates that particular value. And this type of approach is very, very powerful. The success story, by talking about a customer or a client with whom you have worked and how you have helped them, it backs up what you say. So it changes that value statement from unsupported hype to fact. We have a track record of doing X, and for example, and you tell the story of how you helped a customer, and it is very, very powerful. So write this down. Lead with the value, back it up with a success story. And this is true on a phone call, it is true in email, it is true in a voicemail. If you feel that you could use some more help with scripting, please visit my website, which is queenofcoldcalling.com, and you can download a free special report there that's called Getting in the Door, How to Write an Effective Cold Calling Script. So let's go on to the next slide, because the fourth rule is that you need to be clear. The best advice I can give to you, if you have an 8 or 9-year-old somewhere in your life, role play with them. Because if an 8 or 9-year-old doesn't understand what you're talking about, neither will your prospect. And if your prospect doesn't understand you, they will not ask you for an explanation. They'll simply say they're not interested and hang up. You are all the experts in what you do, and your prospects are not. And I'm not saying that your prospects are stupid. They're not stupid. It's simply that they don't know with the kind of knowledge that you do about your products and services. So you need to make it very clear for them. Here's an example. I had a client who attended our cold calling college, and the company that he was with worked with small to mid-sized companies, and they sold software that helped these companies manage their money. So before Cold Calling College started, he sent me this email. And the email went like this. First, I'll introduce myself and the company. Then I say we specialize in business performance management solutions for budgeting, reporting, analysis. I hear not interested, then they hang up before I can say anything else. Another thing I have tried is the reason I am calling is to introduce our budgeting, reporting, analysis solutions and to invite you to a seminar. After this, I hear not interested, then they hang up. Prospects were hanging up on him, and no wonder, really. What he was saying was very confusing, and it wasn't clear, and it had nothing in there about the value. So after going through the Cold Calling College process, he changed his introduction to, we help business owners keep the money they make. Short, sweet, to the point, focused on value, and clear. And prospects stop hanging up on him. So write this down. Focus on the value and be crystal clear. The next slide. So to summarize what we've talked about today, rule number 1 is understand your sales cycle and your goal. Your cold call is the introduction, and your goal is the action that you want that prospect to take. And this goal has to be manageable, and it has to be bite-sized, both for you and for your prospect. Number 2, out of everybody in the entire world who might buy what you're selling, who is most likely to? Who is most likely to buy a lot and come back and buy some more? Put together a targeted list. You will have far better success. And number 3, answer your prospect's question, why should they buy from you? And the way you do that is by leading with the value and backing it up with a success story. And then number 4 is be crystal clear, because a prospect who doesn't understand what you're talking about is not going to become a customer. So before we open up for questions, because I've left time for questions, there are a few resources that I would like you to be aware of, and we're on the next slide. First, if you go to queenofcoldcalling.com, you can download the free special report, Getting in the Door, How to Write an Effective Cold Calling Script. And this report will help you put together an attention-getting approach that's going to resonate with your prospects. And in addition, if you'd like to learn more about the new rules of cold calling, make sure to open the email that you're going to get from Jigsaw, because after this webinar, I know Jigsaw will be sending out an email, and that email contains the link that you can use to download the new free report, Cold Calling in the 21st Century, The New Rules. And this report is actually not available anywhere else. It's only available right now to the Jigsaw community, and that will be in the email that Jigsaw will be sending out later. And so now I want to turn everything back over to Shannon so I can take some questions. Do we have questions?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was on mute, Wendy. We do have several questions.
Okay, good.
Here's the first one. When you get a live person, how do you bridge the gap between interrupting them and getting to the purpose of the call?
That's an interesting question. The best thing that you can do is get to the point. You do not need to ask, how are you today, or may I have a moment of your time, or anything like that. You can simply follow the formula that I've been speaking about. Introduce yourself, have a value statement, give a brief example, and then ask for what you want, whether that's to have the conversation on the telephone or to schedule a meeting. If you are brief and to the point, your prospect will probably be receptive.
Okay, great. Next question. If you can never get a prospect on the phone, but you know that they are highly qualified, Do you recommend putting them on your monthly email newsletter without their proactive permission? Is this spam?
I would not recommend putting someone on an email newsletter without their permission because it is spam. What I would recommend that you do is, if you cannot get them on the telephone, you want to think strategically and come up with some other ways that you can contact them. It might be a series of voicemails. It might be voicemails and emails. And an email from an individual is different from being put on a newsletter list. So you can send someone emails, but you don't want to put them on your newsletter list. You could send them a letter. You could send them faxes. You could send them a gift. There are many different things that you can do. Be creative and think of other ways that you might be able to reach this prospect beyond the telephone, if it's somebody that you really want to talk to.
Okay, next question. If you're brand new to selling a new business solution and you and your company don't have any of their own success stories, do you recommend borrowing success stories, making one up, or just using a generic success story?
Well, first of all you need is one to start out with. And if you are brand new to the business, and I'm not clear whether this question is from somebody that's brand new to the business or that it is a brand new business. If you are brand new to the business, if the business has been around, the business will have success stories that you can use. If it is a brand new business, more than likely the people who have started the business, if you're a brand new business owner, I'm willing to bet that you probably have some experience in the field in which you've started your business. It's simply that it's a brand new company, and so it's perfectly legitimate to talk about your experiences in that particular field or industry, even if they didn't happen under the umbrella of your brand new company.
Okay, next question. How long do you think a voice message should be?
A voice message should be short and to the point, just the same way a cold calling script should be. There are a couple of things that you want to do in a voicemail, however, and the first is to make sure that the prospect has your phone number. So my recommendation is introduce yourself, say your phone number slowly so your prospect can write it down. Say what you have to say, get to the point, and then say your phone number, name and phone number again slowly so your prospect can write it down. Simply saying your phone number twice slowly will increase the chances that somebody might call you back.
Okay. And what are your thoughts on cold emailing?
Cold emailing works. My preference is for a phone call because on a phone call you can have a conversation and you can read the person's inflections, you can read their tone. You cannot do any of that through email. So my recommendation is always to try and reach someone by phone first. However, if you cannot reach them by phone, certainly email can be very effective. And you want to follow the same type of rules that you would use in a cold call, in that it's got to focus on the value and how you help your customers. You want to keep it short and sweet to the point. You want to ask that prospect to take action. And possibly the most important part of it is that you need to have a really good subject line that will get your prospect's attention so that they will open your email. Because if they don't open your email, nothing else matters.
Okay, and our last question is, how do you feel about being honest with the person you're calling? For example, this is a sales call.
One should always be honest with the prospect. Honesty should be a given. However, you do not need to say this is a sales call. Your prospect will know it's a sales call. But yes, always be honest with your prospect.
Okay, great. So Wendy, once again, thank you very much. We appreciate your time, and thank you for everyone on the call. Do you have any final words, Wendy?
Well, I do. I have a couple final words. First of all, I want to thank you, Shannon, and Ben, and everybody at Jigsaw for putting this together. And then I would like to share with everyone who's listening in my all-time favorite quote from Henry Ford. And Henry Ford said, either you think you can or you think you can't, and either way you're right. And so go have a fabulous prospecting rest of the day, and I'm visualizing everyone on the line just surrounded by cash.
Great. Thank you, Wendy, and thank you to everyone on the call. We'll be sending out an email with a recording of the presentation later today. Thanks.